fight from within. You're about to go behind enemy lines.
Roger, 3-2. Goliath copies all. Go ahead. Target is surrounded by multiple firms entering what appears to be a residential area. Requesting permission to engage.
From the People's Republic of New York City, you're now going behind enemy lines with Gene Baradelli and Russ Gallo.
And you are now behind enemy lines. Hey there, how you doing, America? Gene Baradelli here with you. So glad to be with us, whether you're joining us at www.behindthemonlinesradio.us, or if you're checking us out on AM radio, FM radio, the internet radio, or whether we're traveling with you as a podcast. We're glad to be here. Russ Gallo in the house. Russ, have we figured out how many people voted yet, or are we still counting?
I'm still looking at hanging chads here. I don't know what the fuck's going on. Oh.
The year was 2000. It was a much simpler time. And it seems like we're back in those days, right? I mean, God. Listen, we were doing the math off air. I don't know if we carried the one right or not, but it looks like the Republicans have the majority in the Senate. Democrats ended up with the majority in the House. At least that's what we think right now. I mean, who the heck knows by the time this is all said and done about where the final numbers drag out, because, you know, Florida is being Florida again, Russ.
Florida and Arizona out-Florida'd Florida. Like, what is going on here?
It was like Arizona said, hold my beer.
Yeah, I mean, how is it that vote totals are changing this drastically after Election Day? I mean, they're finding bags full of votes. I don't understand what's going on, Gene.
Yeah, they're in trunks of cars and stuff like that, apparently. I don't know. You know, it's always the same suspects. It's the same usual suspects here, Russ. We're looking at, once again, I mean, a whole generation later, Broward County in Florida coming up with votes. Literally coming up with votes, because there's an affidavit floating out there. I don't know if you've seen this, Russ. There's an affidavit floating out there from a temp Board of Elections worker in that county saying that she was an eyewitness to Board of Election employees in a back room filling out ballots. It was crazy.
Yeah, I mean, in the past, there's a whole laundry list of these proven allegations against this county and the election supervisor there. But they've destroyed ballots in the past. They've miscounted them. They've done a whole host of things. One of the oddities, Gene, of the Florida election law, which I've read about this weekend, was that ballots that are undeterminable as to who the voter, when the machine scans it, can't tell who the voter was really trying to vote for. They allow human beings to try to figure out the voter's intent on a damaged ballot and then fill out a new ballot on that voter's behalf. Now, I don't understand how that can be.
It's absolutely crazy. It's absolutely crazy to do that. Listen, I can understand if a ballot that has a check mark on it instead of filled in the oval, or it has an X on it and they filled in the oval. First of all, why are you even looking at those right now? Second, you usually look at those when they're in a certain margin. Each jurisdiction is different, or if there's a court order to do so. I mean, listen, we've gone through our share of recounts together, Russ, and have seen this happen firsthand in the People's Republic of New York. But at the same time, it would seem absolutely crazy that they basically throw out that ballot and put in a new one, because that'll go through the machine and that will actually be counted. I don't get it at all. It seems pretty ludicrous to me.
Yeah, and I mean, the allegation that you raised earlier was that Broward County was actually filling out these new ballots on behalf of voters, guessing what their original intent was, and doing so without representatives from Rick Scott's campaign. That to me is blatantly unfair, unethical, and I don't understand how it would not be illegal. The Florida statute is pretty clear. Representatives from both campaigns would have to be there whenever they're trying to determine a voter's intent to fill out a new ballot on that voter's behalf.
In the Pitney Bowes room. Which on its
face sounds crazy to begin with, but okay.
But it's in a back room called the Pitney Bowes room, Russ. It's like a mail room. It's not even like an official conference room or office or anything like that. It's literally a back room deal when you think about it. It's back room mayhem.
And so Fox News had this stat on the ticker the other day. It said The last 27 recounts nationwide for statewide offices, the Democrats won, guess how many?
How many? I don't know.
27 of 27. So the Democrats have won 27 of 27. Out of those 27, 3 were actually flips from Republican to Democrat. But
and that was in how many years?
I don't remember the years off the top of my head, but those were the last 27.
In Florida?
No, nationwide, statewide recounts.
Well, clearly they didn't count the recount that Russ and I were involved in the People's Republic of New York, where we won that one.
Yeah, it wasn't a statewide one. Statewide recounts.
Whatever, doesn't matter. Same thing.
We were involved in a what was it, dog catcher recount.
No, we were involved in a state Senate recount, and we won by a bag full of votes. Let's be honest.
Definitely a bag full of votes, yeah. I mean, that's where the term came from. But oddly enough, in Florida, Gene, they're finding bags of votes. Literally. They found a bag of votes in a closet, a teacher's closet. Bags of votes were delivered to the Board of Elections down there in a privately owned car, not a Board of Elections vehicle or state vehicle. Partially to blame on all this is, ironically enough, Governor Rick Scott. He probably should have gotten rid of this election supervisor, or at the very least suspended her or investigated that office in Broward County. They're clearly incompetent and putting democracy in danger down there in the Sunshine State.
You know, it's interesting, Russ, because if there's one thing that we know is election administration. I mean, it was kind of our bread and butter for many years up here in New York, right? So when we talk about whether or not people are competent or not, when we talk about the Board of Elections, you have to assume, unfortunately, the default setting is the Board of Election employs the unemployable. They employ people who do not know how to operate in the real world. And Russ is laughing because he knows that I'm absolutely right on this point. So you got to start from that default position. That's number one. Number two, when we're talking about things like, how ballots are delivered and where they're left and all that, we've seen it all. We've seen ballots and voting machines left in schools for 72 hours after the election. We've seen Board of Election documents shredded in the Board of Elections by opposition party. We've seen all kinds of shenanigans on recounts and claims of fraud and literally, we've gone to poll sites and we've seen people filling out ballots on the hoods of cars together as if they were a voting block. That was in Brighton Beach. I know that you remember that one.
Yes, I remember that clearly.
But not for nothing. If anybody thinks that these are small issues that are just isolated to Broward County is the most extreme example, but this happens everywhere and it goes unreported, Russ. And as far as Governor Scott having to fire this Brenda Snipes, who was, I guess, a commissioner in that county. Remember how, I don't know if it operates the same way in Florida as it does here in the People's Republic of New York, but you can't fire an election employee of the opposite party, especially at a commissioner level. That's got to be done by the head of the party in that county. So if it is anything like New York, Rick Scott may not have been able to get rid of her at all. She could be their ace in the hole, all-star #1 employee on the Democratic side in that county, and she'll stay there for all eternity, for all we know.
Yeah, I mean, Florida, I don't know, does Florida have early voting?
Yes, they do. I believe they do.
So in New York, and the reason why I hesitate, because I know in New York State, we do have a form of early voting. It's called an absentee vote, an absentee ballot. But that ballot is only valid if you have a legitimate reason to do so. You're going to be out of the county on the day of election for a legitimate purpose. You can fill one of these things out. So they're not as common as you may think in New York. However, they are abused, like Gene had mentioned. Interestingly, Gene, I don't know if you've seen the rules like for places like Arizona or another state where they're having trouble counting the vote, and then somehow the Democrat now has more votes than they did on election day. But I almost called it an absentee ballot, but that early voting system there is you basically fill out this ballot just because you want to early. It goes in, and then a Board of Elections person reviews the signature on the ballot that was submitted. And if they deem it to be suspicious, they'll set aside that ballot until the person themselves is contacted and given a chance to cure the fatal defect, in this case, the signature. Now, here's the problem in Arizona. That ability to cure a defective ballot is only offered in heavily Democratic counties. The Republican, more rural counties don't have that rule. Now, my question, Mr. Baradelli, is under the Constitution, the federal Constitution, do we not have equal protection under the law?
We do have.
How could one jurisdiction in a state allow for the curing of a ballot where the same state, for the same office holder that they're voting for, does not allow it?
Well, to be honest, I got to pull out my pocket Constitution. But I believe that the administration of elections is actually left up to the states in the Constitution.
It absolutely is, but the states obviously have to follow the Constitution in the administration of those elections. They can't say, well, Asian Americans are not allowed to vote in New York City as part of our state's rights. Like, they obviously can't say that,
right,
because there are other parts of the Constitution that would violate. One person, one vote, although it's not explicitly said in the Constitution, it's pretty clear that equal protection under the law. One part of Arizona cannot have a rule that disenfranchises people when another part of the state allows that ballot to be cured. Now, that's the legal battle currently going on in Arizona, and I believe a judge has extended the time for some of those rural counties, Republican strongholds, to cure some of those ballots that were defective. So we'll see how that race winds up panning out in Arizona between McSally and what's her name,
Kristen Sinema, yes.
The one who said it's okay to work and fight for the Taliban.
Yeah, absolutely. That Kristen Sinema, which again, how this race is even close, I have no idea. But listen, I don't like the idea of curing absentee ballots. I think the ballot should speak for itself. I don't think that anyone should have had the opportunity. This law sounds very suspicious to me, mainly because, at least how it works in New York is, when you fill out your absentee ballot, first of all, anyone can fill out an absentee ballot application and give whatever legal reason it is. If it passes muster based upon the election law, you get the ballot. The ballot can either be given to your representative and hand-delivered to you, or be put in the mail. Then when you put it back in, you sign the ballot envelope, and you compare the signature on the envelope to the signature on record at the Board of Election. And if that signature doesn't match up to the satisfaction of both board employees that review it, one Democrat, one Republican, then it's set aside for 72 hours to allow for a court challenge. If there's no court challenge in 72 hours, the ballot's just opened anyway. But the problem with the system in Arizona is, how do we know that that's going to get back into the care and custody of the voter that signed it? Or if they just say, that's my signature and here's a sample of my signature. It just gets stupid at that point, Russ, that you're trying to put the crap back in the horse, really. The ballot should speak for itself. If it should be opened, open it. If it shouldn't be opened, that's it. There shouldn't be a day after, a morning after pill for voting. It just shouldn't be allowed.
No, I agree. I want to debate the whole legitimacy of early voting, period. I don't understand how this is even a thing. You should have to go to your poll site on election day and cast a ballot. You should have to show ID at your poll site to cast a ballot. This voting by mail or internet, it opens the door for fraud. It opens the door for illegal immigrants to vote. Like, I don't understand, Gene. What is so difficult about showing up at a poll site with an ID to prove who you are and cast your own ballot?
You mentioned about illegal immigrants voting. There's actually a fight right now in Florida over a vote that was objected to that Democrats are trying to keep in, where there's no dispute that it was a vote that was submitted from a quote-unquote non-documented citizen.
And I believe that's Senator Bill Nelson who's fighting to keep those votes in.
Absolutely right. But just to
Florida.
show people that, all the talk about voter fraud and the need for voter ID and to, have better election administration, these are real points. They're not made-up points that one party should be worried about the other. Everyone should be worried about this. No citizen's vote should be overridden or canceled out by the vote of a non-citizen in any race whatsoever. It just shouldn't happen.
Yes,
citizenship should have its privileges.
Of course, and for people who say, well, it's so few and far in between that it's not really an issue. The Florida senatorial race right now between Scott and Nelson is less than 0.15% separating the two candidates. A handful of illegals that probably voted in this election definitely could tip the balance. I mean, it's without a doubt now that elections are so close across the country in some jurisdictions.
It's absolutely nuts right now, Russ, to think that even voters who weren't registered in the right place that were given a provisional ballot. Of course, we want to get those votes counted. There's definitely a balancing act we have to do here, but at the end of it, there has to be greater accountability by the people counting the votes. One quote that I always remember from Boss Tweed, if there's anything New York has ever led the nation on, is corruption. The one quote I remember from Boss Tweed is, as long as I'm counting the ballots, what does it matter? Of course, I'm paraphrasing. It was something to that effect. But that's what it comes down to. The people who are counting the votes are trying to insert themselves into our elections. And it's happening more often than not in more jurisdictions across the country. And those same people, and I'm going to say it right out flatly, they're Democrats most of the time. Those same people are trying to I lost my train of thought for a second here, but those same people, those Democrats, are trying to pick and choose winners